As responding units scrambled to the location, they discovered a distraught father hovering over his child's lifeless form. 30-year-old Karina Vetrano was sprawled face down upon the soil. Her workout clothes were disheveled and yanked low. Facial bruising was evident. Her smile was shattered, and her legs were badly scraped up. Police attempted to pry the father from the scene, yet he gripped her body tightly. The man kept uttering the same heartbroken phrase over and over, "I must bring my girl home." A mere couple of hours earlier, Karina had simply headed out for a jog. A seasoned athlete, she usually ran those trails alongside her dad. That afternoon, however, a bad back kept him inside. Her final words to him were an assurance of her safety. 2 hours ticked by without her return. Once investigators secured the perimeter, the brutal reality of the situation became obvious. Karina struggled with every ounce of strength she had. She bit the assailant with such ferocity that her own teeth fractured. Forensic teams recovered genetic material from under her nails. Unfortunately, the profile didn't trigger any hits in the federal system. This suggested a terrifying truth. Somewhere close by, a predator had viciously ambushed a victim in broad daylight before vanishing into thin air, without leaving any clues behind. Nevertheless, the details that surfaced later were much more chilling than a typical homicide case. Genetic evidence told a dark story, and the eventual arrest was so jarring that seasoned cops were deeply rattled. Several officers actually required counseling to process the trauma. To grasp the full scope of this tragedy, we must look at where it started. Hey everyone, let's take a quick break. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from today. If you could, please share your location and current time in the chat. I truly appreciate the engagement. Now, let's get back into the story. 30-year-old Karina Vetrano was a determined runner, constantly striving to beat her personal records and increase her distance. It started off as a perfectly normal day. Around 5 p.m., she headed out for a jog towards Spring Creek, a secluded Brooklyn neighborhood. The preserve spans roughly 2 square miles, filled with wild vegetation and dense thickets. This natural area was located merely blocks away from the Vetrano family residence. She usually hit the trails with her dad, Phil, who was a former fireman, but on that specific day, his back was acting up, so he stayed behind. Phil had a bad feeling about her solo trek. Given how deserted it was, he warned her that jogging there alone was risky. "Relax, I've got this," she assured him. Moments before she left, Karina snapped a quick self-portrait. You can spot her mother, Kathy, strolling in the background of that final image. Then, Karina walked out the door. Phil recalled that roughly 45 minutes later, a wave of anxiety hit him, signaling that something was terribly wrong. Nearly 2 hours had vanished, and Karina was still missing. Phil called her phone repeatedly, but each attempt went straight to voicemail. Desperate, he contacted a lifelong buddy serving on the force in New York City. A cruiser rolled into the neighborhood to begin looking. After initial efforts turned up nothing, authorities significantly ramped up the scale of their operation to find the missing girl. Backup units from the 106th Precinct swarmed the location, pushing through dense marsh grass reaching 10 feet tall. Even as night fell, the operation continued. Investigating Officer Barry Brown recalled that a heavy sense of chilling unease hit them while scouring the overgrown pathways during the search. Someone eventually voiced the group's collective fear, saying the situation felt off. Phil joined the efforts, tracking his daughter's location via her phone's GPS signals. The search moved into the wetlands, about 15 feet from the path. Neighbors had long complained about the dangers lurking in that specific spot. The dense vegetation was a known hazard for the neighborhood. Near 10:30 p.m., the sound of a man's scream sent officers sprinting into the brush. Phil made the discovery. There, he saw his daughter lifeless on the ground. Officers were forced to drag the grieving father away because he simply refused to release her. He kept stating that it was time to bring her back home. Investigators Brown and Russo observed significant facial trauma and various other wounds on the victim. Her dental work was ruined, and her legs were badly scuffed. Her clothing had clearly been tampered with during the assault. Authorities noted signs of a criminal sexual attack. Karina resisted her assailant so violently that she shattered her own teeth while biting the monster responsible for this crime. Detectives observed her fingers clutching clumps of sod, implying she had been hauled across the landscape. Chief Boyce mentioned to the press that the young woman clearly struggled for her life until her very last breath during that horrific encounter. A subsequent forensic examination confirmed the case was a murder involving manual asphyxiation. During the fatal struggle, the perpetrator squeezed her throat with such immense pressure that a clear mark from his palm remained visible on her skin for the police to see during their initial investigation. The father eventually expressed a belief that fate led him to her side. He felt she guided him because she wanted her dad there. This investigation stands as one of the most grueling and emotionally taxing efforts in modern law enforcement history, conducted by the department in recent memory. Aerial footage from Chopper 2 illustrates the massive scale of the investigation. We are dealing with a complex scene in a secluded location. We are doing our absolute best to search through these grueling conditions. The grass is extremely tall. We are hacking through the brush with machetes to find any clues left behind. On Thursday, a swarm of investigators canvassed Howard Beach, questioning local laborers and contractors. They're checking our schedules and confirming our whereabouts from Tuesday. They're desperate to catch this monster. I'm unsure, but I pray he's caught. Search teams are currently clearing the brush in 300-foot increments, carefully using hand tools to preserve potential evidence. Our team is scouring a massive plot of land right behind the site, searching for any clues. Both parents are clearly devastated. They just need some answers. They're seeking justice. They want to lay their girl to rest with honor. People usually come here to run or walk and just soak in the quiet. Now I'm actually scared to step outside. During the last presser, the lead detective labeled this a major public danger and is moving forward with these actions. A 6-month audit of park patrols nearby, pulling records from the sex offender tracking division, and pushing ahead with the mobile tower data search. Up to this point, just the thought that a complete stranger might have taken her life is keeping the whole neighborhood on edge. My biggest fear is that if this guy actually lives nearby, he's probably just waiting to strike again. Phil Vetrano looked back on his daughter as an ambitious, joyful soul who had her whole life together, basically any parent's pride and joy. Though she barely cleared 4 feet 11 inches, she possessed a massive spirit. She was incredibly sharp, too, having completed her master's at St. John's University. Even while staying at home, she commuted to Manhattan for her job as a speech therapist, where she helped kids with special needs. Her pal Erica described Karina as a total live wire, a little firecracker of energy whose booming laugh could light up an entire house. On top of her therapy gig, she also moonlighted at an Astoria club as a promoter, bringing in crowds and getting a cut of the VIP table sales. Friends mentioned a guy named Paul who worked at that same club. Apparently, he wouldn't take no for an answer, and often got hostile whenever she brushed him off. They actually thought he might have been following her at one point. However, detectives cleared him once they verified he was clocked in at work when the attack happened. As the probe deepened, it looked more and more like a random act of violence by someone she didn't know. Our team is still on site right now, gathering every bit of physical evidence we can find. We'll be scouring this spot for a few days since it's so isolated. We've got a perimeter set up, and we're going to clear out all the brush until we're sure nothing's left behind. We have a good amount of forensic data already. Tips from the public have been pretty thin, though. We've only gotten 3 so far, and they haven't given us much to go on. Because of that, we've bumped the reward up to $10,000. People around here really care. I'm heading back out there the second I'm done here. The locals have been incredibly helpful and supportive, and we're hoping that pays off. Just remember, this is a pretty secluded spot. The victim was out jogging while the sun was still up. We're praying someone caught a glimpse of her entering the park. Leads are scarce right now, but we're still processing the scene. Everything we've found so far is currently being processed by the medical examiner's office. We're aiming to have a solid genetic profile ready in a few days. Honestly, these things happen way too often in the city, but it's rare for it to be a random homicide. Usually, these incidents occur late at night. When we see crimes like this on the street, like sexual assaults, stranger-on-stranger attacks are actually down, but they still happen. A situation where a runner gets targeted in a public park during the day is just unheard of. It's extremely rare. Roughly 400 mourners gathered for the service. A large group of New York City firefighters showed up to pay their respects as well. She lived life to the fullest. Her father shared during the eulogy. She treated every day like a gift, squeezing every bit of joy she could out of every second. In only 30 years, she did more than most do in 100. We weren't just close. We were practically the same person. She was stunning, a real chip off the old block. It's just devastating. I have a message for that coward. Standing in front of their house for the first time since the tragedy, the parents finally addressed the media. You should know my daughter was a powerhouse, and I promise you, you're going to feel that power. Not just while you're rotting in a cell, but for all eternity when you're burning in hell. Karina really believed in what goes around comes around, and as everyone can see, she was something special. The whole world sees her light. I'm telling you, you'll be paying for this forever. We're going to get justice. The cops are on it, and God's on it. It's coming. Meanwhile, the assault kit didn't yield any clean DNA. They did, however, find enough under her nails and on her phone, which was found just a few steps away, to piece together a profile of the killer. The murder sent shockwaves through the neighborhood, leaving everyone terrified and searching for answers. People eventually pooled together thousands of dollars to help catch the person responsible. The police put up $25,000. City Hall chipped in $10,000 more, and the rest came from a massive GoFundMe campaign. They're following every path. But honestly, we just need one person to step forward and say, I know who did this. That's the goal. If I ever stop and have nothing to focus on, I'll probably just fall apart. I have to stay locked in on this every single day. This mission is what's keeping me going right now. Heavy machinery was brought in to mow down the tall grass at the scene, alongside a massive police presence. Since the area where she was found is federal land, the NYPD brought the FBI in to help with the heavy lifting. Federal agents bolstered the search with extra manpower and tech. They even flew drones over the marsh to get a bird's-eye view of everything. Cops also checked out a camp for the unhoused about a mile away, but they eventually realized it probably had nothing to do with what happened. They also hit up registered offenders in the vicinity and chatted with several people known to hang out or sleep inside the park grounds. To throw everything they had at the case, the NYPD formed a dedicated unit. It pulled 2 detectives from all 8 Queens South squads, while the city tried to make the park safer for everyone. A federal rep mentioned that the massive stretch of land where she died was usually only watched from the edges, and even then, patrols weren't very consistent. Those same units had to cover huge parts of Gateway National Park across 2 boroughs. It's a massive hurdle for us. We've discussed this with the locals before, and it's a known issue, the U.S. Park Police head admitted. Detectives noted that since there were no witnesses, the DNA was their only real shot. They'd already run that profile through the system, but so far, it hasn't popped up with a name in the federal database. The national DNA database we use only goes back to 1998. So, this guy could have a record from before that time, Chief Boyce noted. Or maybe it's a younger guy who's never been caught before. In a situation like this, we had to look for any similar crimes in other areas. Early on, New York detectives heard from Massachusetts State Police, who wondered if there was a link to the death of Vanessa Marcotte, a 27-year-old Google employee killed in Princeton on August 7th. Vanessa actually lived in the city, but was visiting her mom in Princeton. On August 7th, she went for a jog and simply never made it back. Eventually, they located her remains in a forested patch roughly half a mile away from her mother's residence. Officials in New York claimed no verified tie existed between these occurrences yet. Regardless, they maintained that every potential tip would be rigorously explored. Head Detective Boyce mentioned their primary conviction remains that Karina's killing was a senseless, unplanned act. Their lead hypothesis is unchanged. Investigators figured the perpetrator vanished through the thick vegetation near the site before heading toward the Belt Parkway. Police combed through every possible exit, though security footage failed to yield a distinct shot of anyone. They canvassed nearby homes and questioned locals. Detectives utilized the classic needle in a haystack analogy, which truly captured the frustrating nature of the manhunt. As the media coverage intensified, a Verizon employee stationed at Spring Creek Park the day Karina died reached out to law enforcement. He claimed to have spotted a shady character. The man sported a heavy knit hat and was wandering the grounds right when detectives believed the violence occurred. Using those specific details, a professional sketch was drafted and shared with the public on August 31st. During a media briefing, Chief Boyce pointed out a suspicious detail. He noted the dark knit cap, highlighting that it was August 2nd. It was quite bizarre to see someone wearing winter gear out there. Now, there is an intense concentration on the cycling trail, which unfortunately lacks any video monitoring. They are hunting for a black male, 5 feet 10 inches tall, between 35 and 45 years old, with an average frame. We need to identify this individual That is why we are releasing this. Once the drawing went public, a retired police administrator reached out to Robert Boyce. He was managing security for a Brooklyn apartment complex and mentioned that one tenant bore a striking resemblance to the portrait. Law enforcement arrived at the unit. The man, identified as Kevin, initially ignored the officers at his door. The team waited outside until he finally stepped into the hallway. Kevin conceded that he did look somewhat like the illustration. Consequently, they brought him in for an interview. While there, he declined to provide a genetic sample. Investigator Barry Brown noted that his refusal to cooperate immediately raised red flags for everyone in the room. Detectives eventually pulled his genetic profile from a trashed bottle he discarded. However, once analyzed, the results proved Kevin's biological markers did not align with the evidence found at the scene. With that path exhausted, the team was essentially starting over. Seeking fresh tips, a true crime program aired security clips of Karina just hours before her death. The recording captured what law enforcement called her standard jogging loop. Both her relatives and the police prayed it might contain some hidden piece of evidence. Officials stated this was the final confirmed footage of Karina. Her family also gathered to walk the paths she was known to frequent. Since the genetic profile yielded no hits in the system, Phil pushed for a relative-based search to see if any kin were already on file. This could uncover the culprit, he insisted. You might establish a direct genetic link, which would drastically narrow down the list of potential suspects. At that time, 9 other states were using that specific investigative tool, but New York was not one of them. Because of this, Phil initiated a petition to change the local regulations. This specialized DNA search goes much deeper, utilizing unique software to identify close relatives rather than a perfect match, which hints that the perpetrator has kin in the system. There are a massive number of cold cases that could finally be resolved using this technology. However, civil liberties advocates are resisting, arguing that such a program might lead to what they call a failure of the legal system. I believe they are simply misinformed about how we are focusing strictly on lawbreakers. Half a year following her death, authorities identified a specific individual in the Karina Vetrano homicide. One suspect was detained. He was formally charged the following day, at which point he asked to apologize to his mother and meet the victim's relatives. "I am truly sorry for my actions," he stated. The series of events that culminated in that arrest actually began roughly a month before. After months of waiting without any significant progress in the hunt for the killer, Lieutenant John Russo decided to take a fresh look at the case files in January of 2017. Russo was among the initial officers on the scene when Karina was discovered, and he also lived in the Howard Beach neighborhood. While he was going through the official records, he suddenly recalled a specific interaction from May of 2016, just months prior to the murder. He began to speculate whether that past moment was actually tied to the current murder investigation. On the far side of the road, near the neighboring house, I spotted a figure moving away. They were dressed in a full athletic suit with the hood pulled tight, despite the 80-degree heat. I recall thinking how odd that was. Russo mentioned the individual appeared to be casing the nearby residences, which prompted him to contact dispatchers. By the time the patrol cars arrived, the man had vanished. However, the very next morning, other locals reported seeing the same suspicious conduct. Witnesses described a person in a two-tone tracksuit, trespassing on several different yards in the neighborhood. Russo later crossed paths with the same guy and asked for his identification. His name turned out to be Chanel Lewis. Back then, Russo presumed the entire matter was over and that their trajectories would never meet again. Nonetheless, when January arrived, that old recollection came flooding back to him. He felt a nagging gut instinct that something was seriously wrong. Thus, he started investigating Chanel Lewis's background. He learned that Lewis had no prior arrests, though he'd been slapped with multiple legal notices regarding the Brooklyn border near Spring Creek Park, opposite the forest area situated within Queens. Russo then contacted Chief Boyce. There was an urgency in his tone that made me feel this was the break we needed, Boyce recalled. We acted immediately. When detectives interviewed Chanel Lewis, he admitted to being very familiar with those specific grounds. He described himself as a quiet person with a small social circle who frequently used the paths to listen to songs and process his thoughts. While helping the police, he provided a genetic sample without a warrant. Investigators also looked into his schooling and found a history of significant behavioral issues. Media reports revealed that during his school years, he once admitted to an aide that he had violent fantasies about attacking his female peers. "I want to hurt them with a knife," he allegedly said. Documentation suggests those statements were made on May 17, 2011, when he was only 15 years old. Sources further alleged that he once questioned what would happen if he carried a weapon into the building. Consequently, the administration contacted law enforcement, and he was taken into custody due to his unstable mental state. He was taken to Kings County Hospital Center for a mental health check and was sent home shortly after. The next month, staff called the authorities again after he reportedly berated a girl and made threats against her relatives. He was hospitalized once more before being released. A certain gossip rag alleged a paranoid schizophrenia diagnosis, yet that claim was never backed up by outside sources. Investigations revealed the New York Post was the sole source for that rumor. Reports show that in September 2011, he moved to a private facility catering to kids with behavioral or emotional struggles. Old schoolmates remembered him as a solitary figure who frequently faced harassment. One peer mentioned he was constantly physically assaulted. He was even targeted and struck by girls, leaving him completely friendless. Another student recalled rare moments where he attempted to defend himself, though he usually didn't. A regular on his bus route noted that his appearance and clothing choices made him a frequent target for ridicule. Conversely, plenty of his peers never saw him act out or start trouble. A fellow student recollected how he mostly kept to himself, hiding under a hoodie while walking the halls. According to the head of Martin de Porres Schools, Chanel Lewis finished his studies in August 2015 without ever being flagged for threatening behavior. The director released a statement clarifying that his record was clean of any disciplinary issues or documented threats against his classmates during his enrollment. While defending his child, Chanel's dad inadvertently gave investigators a massive lead. He insisted his son was innocent because he had personally driven the boy to the hospital the morning after the killing. Medical staff treated a wound on Chanel's hand, which he claimed happened during a scuffle. Detectives scoured local clinics until they tracked down the physician who performed the procedure. Detective Barry Brown noted that the physician pulled a small fragment out of the young man's hand. When police processed Chanel's voluntary DNA sample, it proved to be an identical match to evidence recovered where Karina was killed. It turned out the item stuck in his hand was likely a piece of Karina's tooth that broke off while she was fighting back. My name is Detective Deal. We are currently on the second floor of the 107th precinct in the detective unit. It is February 5th, 2017, at about 10:33 in the morning. I am starting the recording device at this time. Since you have been advised of your legal rights, do you feel okay answering some questions? Fine. Yes. Great. Okay then. Chanel, let's begin by looking back at that Tuesday night, August 2nd, 2016. Does that specific night ring a bell? Yeah. Okay. So, tell me your location then. I was over near Gateway and that Spring Creek Mall area. Near the mall and Gateway? Spring Creek Park. The park? Right. So you went inside? Yes. Were you hanging out with people or solo? Just me. What time did you show up? Around 5 o'clock. Were you sticking to the paths or out in the fields? The paved trail. Got it. So while you were wandering the park, did an incident occur? Yeah. Tell me what went down. I was just there and spotted a girl out for a run, and well, things just spiraled from there due to some other stuff going on. Okay. Was this jogger alone, or was she with a group? She was by herself. Where exactly were you standing when you first noticed her? Were you out on the lawn or on the path? On the path. Okay. And were you walking around or just stationary? I was walking and had my headphones in. Were you on foot or running too? Just walking? Walking? Were you heading in her direction? Yeah, I was headed toward her, and then I made a move, and then it all just happened. So, when she finally reached you while she was jogging and you were strolling, what occurred? Well, I was dwelling on some old issues and just snapped, so I started swinging at her. I see. Where did those blows land? Mostly her face and around her mouth. Face and mouth. Did you snatch her up first, or did you just start punching immediately? I think I grabbed her before anything else. You grabbed her? How exactly did you do that? Where on her body did you get a hold of her? I just began striking her because of that other thing that happened earlier. I get that, but was the grab the very first move? Or did you just lead with a punch? What was the very first physical contact? I snatched her up. Got it. And what was your grip like? Like this. Using both of your hands? Yeah. Okay. What part of her were you holding on to? Was it her neck, her hips, or maybe her shoulders? Right around here. So, her shoulders. Did she say a word? Nope. Did she let out a yell? No. Her tooth snapped. Excuse me? Her tooth broke? Yeah. Did you have your hand over her mouth? I didn't. Okay. How much time passed while you were attacking her? Roughly how long? The entire ordeal took maybe 5 minutes. 5 minutes. Okay. How many feet into the tall grass do you think you pulled her? Give me an estimate on the distance. Maybe 10 feet. I see. What about her clothes? What state were they in? They were gone. You stripped them off? Yeah. Okay. What specifically was removed? All her clothing. You mentioned earlier that you were acting out of rage, is that correct? Yeah. Tell me more about that frustration. See, I used to stay at a different place before I moved. Okay. And there was this guy who would always show up around there. He would blast music and bring a whole crew with him, which I hated because it made me feel uneasy. I just wanted my privacy and some quiet. I would usually just, look, Chanel, I'm aware that you weren't really feeling up to discussing any of this yesterday evening, right? Talking about last night, but today's different and you're ready to open up. I heard you told Detective Brown that you're looking to get your life back on track. Is that true? Yes. And he suggested you wait until you were in this room to start talking, which is exactly what you did, correct? Yeah, fine. 20-year-old Chanel Lewis was taken into custody and slapped with second-degree murder charges. The judge ordered him held with no bond. Chanel has been locked up for 6 months now. Following the arrest, Karina's relatives went to the community for input on what to do with the leftover GoFundMe donations. Phil posted on the donation site that since everyone contributed, they all deserved a say in the matter. Phil eventually announced that nearly $300,000 had been given away, with a portion funding a new scholarship at Archbishop Malloy High School to honor Karina. A grand jury eventually returned an indictment against Chanel Lewis on a variety of counts. He faced 13 charges in total, ranging from homicide to sexual battery, all linked to Karina Vetrano's passing. He was looking at a potential sentence of life behind bars, with no chance of release. Lewis entered a plea of not guilty. This evening, the family of Lewis insists it simply couldn't be him. His father, Richard Lewis, expressed sympathy for the victim's family but maintained they arrested the wrong guy. He's honestly a great kid, a truly fantastic young man. You saw my brother on the news, he's just a scrawny guy. There's no way a guy that thin could overpower such an athletic girl. He stays to himself and could never do something that violent. I want to express my gratitude to everyone who has shown my family support during this. I stand by my son because I love him. I brought him up to love God and value human life. My boy is kind and religious. He wouldn't harm a soul. He struggles with his mental health and requires professional assistance. He isn't a thug. He just needs medical care. I'm asking for some space for my family. Let us handle this privately and let my boy go through the legal system to get the support he needs. For quite a while, Karina's relatives lobbied hard to get detectives to adopt familial DNA tracking for their criminal probes. Come June 2017, New York's Forensic Oversight Board finally gave the green light to use that tech for homicides, sexual assaults, and other major felonies. This move happened even with pushback from civil liberties groups who worried that law-abiding citizens might get dragged into police matters just because of their relatives. Chanel Lewis was already in custody by the time those new rules were officially signed off by the board. Consequently, the ruling had no impact on Karina's situation, though it might change the game for future probes. As mentioned, cops had previously checked if her death linked back to Vanessa Marcotte's killing. Eventually, investigators ruled out any link between the two files. On April 15, 2017, police announced 31-year-old Angelo Colon Ortiz's arrest after genetic markers tied him to Vanessa's murder. He ended up admitting to second-degree murder and robbery without a weapon. On November 2, 2022, he got a life sentence and won't see a parole board until 2067. At age 81, November 2018. The gallery was overflowing with loved ones from both sides. Like you said, the air was thick with emotion. Karina Vetrano's mom sat in the front, clutching a crucifix and weeping throughout the proceedings. Chanel Lewis, the man charged with the crime, was present as well. His own mother sat nearby, holding a Bible and crying just as much. Things kicked off with the opening remarks. Public defenders representing Lewis looked the jury in the eye and declared their client's total innocence. The defense questioned the proof, pointing out there weren't any witnesses and claiming Lewis was bullied into a confession by cops rushing to close the case. During his intro, prosecutor Brad Leventhal argued the two simply crossed paths by accident. He claimed the victim didn't do anything to set him off. He just saw her and took her life. The state argued that Chanel was a loner, with no job, no partner, and barely any friends to speak of. They painted him as a man simmering with resentment. Their whole case rested on the idea that this built-up rage triggered a completely senseless and random attack. On that afternoon, he vented his fury on a lovely young girl who was just out in her gym clothes, according to the state. Still, his lawyers countered those arguments, reminding everyone that there wasn't a single person who actually saw the crime. Attorney Jenny Chung told the court that no witness would testify to seeing him do it. She suggested the prosecution was trying to force a narrative that just didn't fit the facts. Chung also took aim at the 10-plus-hour police questioning, arguing that officers cut corners and presented a half-baked case to the jury. Furthermore, the legal team insisted that the genetic material supposedly connecting Chanel Lewis to the scene was totally sketchy. Lawyer Robert Mueller contended that too many people, including the victim's dad, had walked through the scene, making the evidence there completely untrustworthy. His defense also maintained that his statement to police was coerced and should never have been allowed into the trial. They argued he only told cops what they wanted to hear, so he could finally go home after hours of waiting. The state, however, doubled down on his specific admissions. The prosecutor quoted him, saying he used Karina to vent his rage. They labeled him the man who strangled her, while highlighting what they called ironclad DNA proof. A forensic specialist stated on the stand that DNA found under Karina's nails, on her phone, and on her neck was a perfect match for Chanel's. A pair of city detectives walked the jury through the grueling evidence collection. Some crime scene photos were so gruesome that Karina's folks were visibly distraught. They broke down several times, and eventually, the parents had to step out of the room. The high-stakes trial over the 30-year-old's death has finally reached its end. The state depicted 22-year-old Chanel Lewis as a bitter, isolated young man who happened upon Vetrano during her evening run and murdered her to release his frustration. He was livid and turned that spite toward Karina, attacking her, slamming her down, and choking the life out of her. Meanwhile, the defense countered that it was actually the cops who were desperate after 6 months with no leads, leading them to pin it on Lewis. They argued that investigators twisted the facts to nail him rather than letting the actual clues dictate who the real killer was. Instead, they just forced the evidence to match their story. After 7 days of grueling testimony, the jury finally stepped away to decide his fate. Following hours of debate, the jurors spent over 60 minutes re-watching the second recorded confession the defendant gave to the police. On top of that, they requested a readback of 74 pages of testimony from the state's forensic DNA specialist. The group also asked for another look at the graphic photos from Karina's medical examination. 36 hours into their talks, 5 jurors admitted they couldn't agree on a guilty verdict. This resulted in a total deadlock. The panel notified the judge in writing that their differences were irreconcilable and that they'd exhausted every possible way to reach a consensus. Even after debating all day, we're still split. It feels like we've hit a wall and can't go any further. We've truly tried everything. Due to this stalemate, the judge was forced to declare the trial a wash. Karina Vetrano's parents looked absolutely crushed and shell-shocked as they exited the building. Family members were sobbing after the mistrial ruling, which caught everyone in the room off guard. "Mr. Vetrano, do you have a second?" "No, nothing to say." The Vetrano family stood in quiet disbelief, realizing the wait for a resolution would be even longer. They stayed silent, but Lewis's attorneys spoke up. The jury realized that DNA and a confession don't tell the whole story. There are massive holes in this case that are clearly visible now. Do you see this as a victory? Sure. I mean, he wasn't found guilty, so that's a plus. Though we all wanted some real closure. This ruling forced a complete restart of the trial, essentially pushing the whole legal nightmare even further down the road. Karina's inner circle faced a never-ending nightmare, forced to experience every gut-wrenching detail of the crime all over again while they fought for some kind of closure in court. Determined to win the rematch, the state's legal team gathered fresh proof, highlighting a deep dive into the digital footprint Chanel left behind right before the cops cuffed him. His browser history was packed with searches for things like getting charged, cutting deals, going to prison, and local headlines about the Vetrano killing. When March 2019 rolled around, the new trial kicked off, seeing Karina's dad take the stand once more to face the guy allegedly responsible for taking his daughter's life back in 2016. There was a heavy moment when Vetrano's old man collapsed on the floor before the jury, choking back tears while describing the horrifying sight of his little girl's lifeless remains out on that path. The lawyers for the accused stuck to their guns about his innocence, claiming that his taped admission of guilt was actually coerced by the authorities. They also argued that a real killer would have left a much bigger genetic footprint at the scene, rather than the tiny traces found by investigators. The state didn't budge though, hammering home the fact that the genetic samples were a dead match and reminding everyone that he'd already admitted to the crime on tape. Just one day before the jury was set to go behind closed doors, a mysterious, unsigned letter showed up on the defense team's desk, allegedly penned by someone on the force. The note raised serious red flags about how the detectives handled things and made some bold claims about the initial stages of the probe. It alleged that early on, Chief Michael Kemper kept telling the team they should be hunting for two buff white guys from the Howard Beach neighborhood. Legal expert Sonny Hostin from ABC News noted that if this letter was the real deal and the claims were legit, it might give the defense a solid chance to fight the verdict later on. Lewis's counsel stated that they'd stumbled onto some shocking intel, indicating that the cops sat on vital info regarding other suspects without ever tipping off the defense team. The defense team also pointed out that the way the police targeted Lewis for a swab seemed like a textbook case of systemic profiling. During that sweep, the authorities rounded up samples from over 360 black men living in Howard Beach and the surrounding boroughs. Given these revelations, the lawyers announced they would hit the court with a motion on Monday, demanding a sit-down over the hidden evidence and the sketchy profiling tactics used during the hunt. Sergeant Brendan Ryan hit back, insisting that the department had done a deep and honest job tracking down the killer. According to the DA's office, the mountain of proof they've built makes it crystal clear that Chanel Lewis is the one who took her life. He further mentioned that over the past 2 years, the legal system had already scrubbed through these exact claims during several hearings and 2 full-blown trials. He dismissed the note as a bunch of lies, while prosecutor Leventhal argued that the mystery letter was just a cheap attempt to throw the whole trial off the rails without any real proof. Earlier today, the bench shot down the defense's plea for a special hearing, promptly sending the 12 jurors off to decide the man's fate. The importance of that moment was massive since the first attempt ended in a hung jury, leaving everyone on edge and nobody willing to bet on which way the scales would tip this time. With so much on the line for the legal teams and the victims' grieving relatives, the tension finally broke on April 1, 2019, when the court prepared to read the final decision. You could hear a pin drop in that room, until the foreman announced they'd found him guilty on all counts, sending a wave of relief through the Vetranos as they walked out of court. I'm just so grateful to that jury for seeing the truth in the evidence, because it feels like years of bottled-up rage and heartache have finally started to fade away. Chanel gave a quick wave with his shackled hands to his people in the gallery before the guards hauled him off to start his sentence behind bars. A few of his followers, who've been watching this whole thing like a hawk, spoke through a rep to say they're still not buying the jury's final call. How can some kid just stroll into that neighborhood, take out a fit young woman, and vanish without a single security camera at the mall or on the street picking up his face? Even with a conviction on the books, the whole situation got messy again, when a wild new twist suddenly threw the entire case back into the shadows. The judge pushed back the sentencing because of some shady business within the jury, which was another massive gut punch to the family who thought this was finally over. Word got out that a juror ratted out 3 others for breaking the rules about discussing the case prematurely, forcing the judge to stall things and grill the panel members himself. DA Richard Brown eventually fired back at the defense's claims, painting a completely different picture of the dynamic behind those closed jury room doors. According to an affidavit, one juror alleged that another person on the panel had already made up their mind on day 1 and wouldn't stop talking about it as the trial went on. The document claims that on the second day, right after the parents got off the stand, that specific juror leaned over and said they'd already reached a verdict and hoped everyone else had too. Brown argued that those remarks from the person in the 4th seat didn't necessarily mean they were prejudiced before the trial even started. He suggested it was just a gut reaction to the gruesome details of the crime, even though jurors are strictly told to stick to the facts presented during the trial. But according to the legal filings, a few people in the room started tossing around outside info that wasn't even part of the case, and some of it was just plain wrong. One lady on the jury allegedly told the group that the reason they didn't find the guy's DNA in certain spots was because the body probably just soaked it all up. She supposedly told a fellow juror that her own past trauma gave her a better perspective, essentially injecting her own lived experience into the room instead of sticking to the facts. This created a vibe where the other jurors felt like they couldn't really push back against her claims, treating her personal stories like they were undisputed facts. That behavior was flagged as a major violation because she turned herself into a rogue expert for the state, causing the whole group to drift far away from the official court record. The legal team from the society brought these points to the judge, but the juror in question flat out denied ever bringing up such a personal and traumatic history to the group. In her official statement, she clarified that she'd never experienced such an assault and never claimed to, adding that she didn't hear anyone else in the room mention it either. The defense also highlighted another instance where a juror supposedly reached a final verdict based on stuff that was never even brought up during the actual trial. One juror drew parallels between a separate sexual assault trial and Karina Vetrano's trauma, arguing that the identical nature of the wounds confirmed the charges. Legal filings claimed the shared details were out of bounds, basically injecting unverified evidence into deliberations while exceeding what a typical person knows from daily life. While that juror owned up to bringing up his past court experience, he noted that a colleague shut him down instantly, causing him to drop the subject entirely. Based on an official affidavit from someone on the panel, the prosecutor stood by their conduct, clarifying that no one claimed to be an expert in the field. Rather, everyone just leaned on their own perspective and voiced their views like regular people, which isn't considered foul play. Post-trial, the lead juror told news crews the evidence was undeniable. Two factors really sealed the deal: a voluntary confession and the massive amount of genetic evidence found at the scene. According to him, they all agreed on the homicide counts, though a couple of people weren't sold on the sexual assault allegations. Conversely, an unnamed juror later confessed to the press that he felt bullied by the rest of the group into delivering a conviction. Ultimately, the court dismissed the allegations of juror bias, clearing the path for the final sentencing on April 23, 2019. On the count of first-degree murder, I am sentencing you to life behind bars with zero chance of ever getting out. After over 2.5 years of waiting, Karina Vetrano's relatives finally gave their heartbreaking statements before Chanel Lewis was sent away for life for the killing. The holidays are gone. No more celebrations, no more joy, and certainly no more laughter. All the light has simply vanished from our world. That killer stripped us of everything, and the only thing keeping me alive is the hope of reuniting with my daughter in the afterlife one day. Comparing his family to the Walking Dead, Phil Vetrano informed 22-year-old Chanel Lewis that Karina had a message. If he sought her pardon in that courtroom, express your regret, and she'll pardon you, but know that I never will. Meanwhile, her mom presented a physical reminder of her daughter, her own footwear. She wore these on the morning of August 2nd while getting ready for her shift. Despite their small size, Judge, they belong to a brave soul and a true leader. With Lewis looming nearby, she remarked that his blank stare was just a mirror of his cold and hollow spirit. While you spent your days eating and browsing horrific content on your phone, she was enduring an agony that never seemed to end. Divine eyes were on you the whole time, Chanel Lewis. The court then tacked on 32 years to his life term for the additional charges. He noted that this tragedy left both sides grieving, describing the horror of a child leaving for a jog and simply vanishing forever. Eventually, the public interest will fade away, and you will find yourself completely abandoned by the world. However, you'll still be locked up when that happens. After his lawyers finished, Lewis briefly maintained his innocence, offering condolences while denying any involvement. Supporters of the defendant claimed police were desperate to solve the crime quickly, leading them to target him just to satisfy public demand. Nearly 40,000 individuals joined a petition demanding that a special unit re-examine the validity of the guilty verdict. Regardless of the protests and heated arguments, the ruling stood firm. Multiple trials and years of legal fighting ended with a conviction and a permanent sentence. Legally speaking, the case is closed, Though the verdict didn't necessarily heal the wounds of a community and family haunted by the ordeal for so long, Karina's loved ones hope she is honored for the person she was, rather than the horrific way her life was taken. They are working to preserve her legacy in her hometown through educational grants, tributes, and local outreach programs. From such a dark event, a positive spark has emerged in the form of a scholarship, even as Karina herself sometimes got lost in the legal noise. The focus should stay on her journey, not the courtroom drama that followed, which is exactly how this narrative concludes. She was a devoted child and a loyal friend, a young lady with big dreams who dedicated her time to helping kids, intentions, and her dreams. One typical warm evening, she stepped outside for a routine workout she'd completed 1,000 times. She headed out for a jog and never returned. That cold, heartbreaking truth became the core of this whole mystery. It shows how a mundane second can suddenly turn permanent, leaving behind a void that her relatives, the neighborhood, and every person who tracked her saga will carry for decades. A stunning tribute to her rests in Spring Creek Park, featuring a stone butterfly, a small angel statue, and glowing candles. Most importantly, her father visits daily, finding the only sense of tranquility he has left at the site of the memorial. It may feel odd since this is where the tragedy occurred, but being here gives me a small sense of agency over the situation. If you could talk to her now, what would your message be? I actually talk to her all the time, and her spirit responds in ways I can't describe. Her dad believes her spirit lives on in nature, and her personal blog, which the family hopes to publish as a memoir one day. How should we remember her? Simply for who she was, a brilliant, stunning, and unique individual who was meant for greatness, and in her own way, she reached it. The future remains uncertain for us, but there is a sense of relief in knowing we can finally start to move on. This tragic case reminds us how fragile ordinary moments truly are. A simple evening jog, something millions of people do every day, can suddenly become a life-altering event. It teaches us that awareness and caution are not signs of fear, but of respect for our own safety. At the same time, this story is not only about loss, it is about resilience. Karina's courage in her final moments, fighting back with everything she had, reflects the strength of the human spirit even in the face of unimaginable danger. Her life, not just her death, deserves to be remembered. A woman dedicated to helping others, full of energy, kindness, and purpose. This case also highlights the importance of persistence in the pursuit of justice. Investigators, family members, and the community refused to give up, even when leads were scarce and the path forward seemed impossible. Their determination shows how collective effort can bring truth to light. But perhaps the deepest lesson is empathy. Behind every headline is a family forever changed. Let this be a reminder to value the people we love, to stay aware of our surroundings, and to never take a single day for granted, because even the most ordinary moments